about. Okay. And this third meeting will be the end of Lahaina Restoration Foundation's commitment to this project. Our goal, our grants and our plan was to simply come up with a use plan for the building. So this, at the end of this meeting, we'll have fulfilled that. And the next steps will be something else to be decided. So Mike, do you wanna, that's pretty much what I have to say. And Mike, do you wanna?
Sure. Yep, that's awesome. So anyway, yeah, my name's Mike Summers, and I do want to thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules to work on this important Lahaina restoration project. I am the president of Planning Consultants Hawaii. We are a Wailuku-based community and land use planning consultancy, and Theo retained us to help them prepare this plan. And so tonight we will give you guys a PowerPoint presentation. During the presentation, I'll give you a brief recap of our prior meetings in April and May. We'll talk a little bit about the community use plan, and we will evaluate some alternatives. We'll discuss implementation, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end of this presentation. I expect the meeting to last about an hour and a half, but it possibly could go on a little longer than that. So we'll just kind of see how that evolves. Let's go to the next slide here. So I'm going to ask Kimberly to go through some Zoom basics because it's likely that you'll ask some questions. So Kimberly, could you address this slide?
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kimberly. I'm the Deputy Executive Director here at Lahaina Restoration Foundation. And I'm going to try to be the tech expert during this portion of our presentation. So you may or may not have been muted when you signed in. You may have chosen that yourself, but I have muted anyone who did not choose that. So everyone should be muted. You may or may not have the ability to unmute yourselves, but we do ask that you wait to be called upon. And there is a way to raise your hand. So we are recording this. You may have heard that announcement when Theo was speaking. That is so that people who could not attend the meeting will be able to watch it later and catch up on the same information that you guys are going to get to see at this moment. So we do have a chat. So if you don't know how to raise your hand, even after I explain it in a few minutes, if you just don't want to speak on camera, that's okay too. You can put your question into the chat and I'd be happy to share that question on your behalf. So that's going to be in your menu button at the bottom on the side of your Zoom to be able to just type in questions, and you can type in questions to a specific person or to everyone. But again, I can address those questions further if that's the route you'd like to take. We do have different systems. I'm imagining all of us have signed on different things, whether they're mobile, tablets, computers, laptops. But what you're looking for is the ability to raise your hand. So in some cases, that's going to be under your menu option reactions. In other cases, it'll be participants, and you'll see that option next to your name. And on a mobile device, you'll either have the 3 lines or the 3 dots that indicates a menu that will pull that up. So if there's a question that it's a place where we're taking questions or where we can take a little bit of a break, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to call on you, unmute you, and let you comment or have your question. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. It is slightly different on every single device, but just look for anything under reactions, participants, or your menu that allows you to raise your hand if you'd like to raise your hand for comment or question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Very helpful. I'm glad I didn't have to do that. So we will kick this off just with some basic meeting ground rules. Very important for these kinds of meetings. And we do appreciate your kukua. It's very important that we have a productive virtual meeting. And we know that the meeting's being recorded. And of course, because we're now used to Zoom, we know that Zoom can be impacted by the internet. For example, we may have some disruptions. There could be some noise. So please be patient, be respectful of others. If possible, try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. We'll see how much conversation we have. Do not use chat for the sidebar conversations. And if you are having problems with Zoom, please do use chat. We'll try to get it figured out. So some of you folks may have attended our meetings on April 21st and May 8th. And if you did, thank you very much. The purpose of those meetings was to seek your input on the historic reuse of the Pioneer Mill Company office. And those meetings were really important because they gave us some direction regarding the preferred uses for this site, and also some ideas on things that we need to be cognizant of as we evaluate and implement those ideas. So those are very productive meetings. And at those initial meetings, we also provided you folks with an overview of the project location, the history of the site and its building. We talked about the building's existing location and also some land use considerations. We also conducted some group exercises, and those group exercises were very important because they gave us some ideas about community benefits that might be derived from this restoration project and how reuse of the building might benefit or negatively impact the community's desires, challenges, and opportunities that might be faced, and some ideas for how we might proceed. So we feel very good about those 2 meetings. I'm just going to revisit the site quickly. Obviously, most of you are very familiar with the site, but for some of you, it may not be. I'll just take a quick look. So the site is rather significant in this neighborhood. It's 1.86 acres. It's really a dominant feature of what is a single family neighborhood adjacent to it. It's dominant because of its size. It's dominant because of its usage and its frontages along Lahaina Luna Road. Very, very visible. We all know that the Pioneer Mill, or maybe we all know that the Pioneer Mill was built in 1910. And at that time, the area around the site was in sugarcane use. And as you can see today from this aerial imagery, it's really transitioned to single family residential uses. And that's kind of consistent with what the zoning is right now in this area. In about 2002, the West Maui Senior Center was proposed, an environmental assessment was done on that project. And then later, the site was redeveloped for the current use. You'll notice it's kind of hard to see on this aerial, but we have the smokestack, Pioneer Mill smokestack. It's about, I don't know, maybe 550 feet from the site. And Makai of that is Honolulu Highway. And Makai of the highway, of course, is our historic and commercial area that's critical for Lahaina. The second slide offers you a better understanding of the immediate area. And at the bottom, we're looking Makai. At the top, we're going Mauka. It doesn't do a lot of service for kind of understanding those relationships. But it does give you a very good understanding of what's around this site. On the site itself, about 3/4 of the site is occupied by the West Maui Senior Center. We can see the building footprint and then the parking that's required to service that use. And because of the existing landscaping, we don't get a very good view of the office, the Pioneer Mill office, but it accommodates about 25% of the site. The site is adjacent to a residential neighborhood. And so any kind of planning that we do really needs to be cognizant of the folks that live here. It also needs to be cognizant of the West Maui Senior Center because they have their own operations and we wouldn't want to impact them as well. And so there are also some land use considerations that are very important. Obviously, one consideration is what's going on the site right now. I talked a little bit about that. We have the West Maui Senior Center. We've also got the building that is the Pioneer Mill office building, which comprises 9,200 square feet. That's a very sizable structure, especially in this neighborhood. 5,000 square feet was built in 1910. 4,200 square feet was added on in 1947. So that's kind of what we're working with on the site. And the zoning and community plan designations are R1 residential. The R1 district is a very restricted district. Obviously single family is a predominant use. There are the West Maui Senior Center is there. It's actually a quite unusual use for a single family neighborhood, but there are public uses that are permitted in the R1 residential district. We'll see a lot of schools in the R1 district in Maui. The zoning recently changed. It used to be single family. With the update of the community plan, it's now public, quasi-public, kind of recognizing the existing use on the property and probably the future use of this building. There is on-site parking. Unfortunately, it's our understanding that on-site parking is maxed out on the site. That's according to the West Maui Senior Center. Parking will be required for any reuse of this building. And so just as an example, if you were to use the entirety of the building for office space at one stall per 500 square feet, you would need a lot of parking. I think that would be around 18 stalls or so. However, you can get off-site parking approval from the county. You can also explore joint use parking. It's possible to acquire land for parking, or potentially you could remove structures on the property to create more on-site parking. One thing I would suggest is that we don't consider using on-street parking. The roadways around the site are residential. There's really not a lot of available on-street parking. And then, of course, we really do need to be cognizant, as I've mentioned before, about the neighboring uses. If they're not happy with what you're proposing and they feel that it negatively impacts their quality of life, you can expect that they will challenge you in your future decision making. So there were quite a few ideas. I'm not going to read the entire list, but some of the big ideas that came out of our April 21st and May 8th meetings included expansion of the West Maui Senior Center. This is kind of a low-hanging fruit item. That would be potentially a great outcome. There was also a lot of discussion about having a museum or historic displays tied to the plantation era. There was a comment, or more than a few comments, about trying to integrate that with West Maui Senior Center activities. There was a lot of discussion about having state or county office buildings there. I should say buildings. I should say reusing the building for office space for state or county. The advantage to that is, for one, it would actually be a permitted use in the existing zoning district. Secondly, you can imagine that having a county office building might be quite convenient. It could take all kinds of different forms and, allow you not to have to drive to Wailuku for some of the services. There were suggestions around daycare, which could coexist with the senior center. Going back to county office space, maybe a planning department permit center. There seemed to be quite some enthusiasm for co-working space or shared space or maker space. That seemed really interesting. Art or performance or creative center with an educational component. Community health facility for vaccinations and health and wellness. Maybe an oral history center where folks can see what's recorded. So there are a lot of really outstanding ideas. This is just a partial list of those. So you might want to ask yourself, well, what is a community use plan? And they can take a variety of different forms, and they can be very, very detailed and highly specific or more generalized. But generally, what a community use plan is it's a long-term vision that's intended to guide the community on its decision making. And so we're talking about uses for the property. We might be talking about the kinds of improvements, might be talking about the phasing of those improvements or the sequencing, the timing of the improvements, when they occur, and funding, where we get our funding. So it's kind of a blueprint. Now, as far as a community vision, from our meetings, we were really kind of able to distill that the community vision had 4 key components or elements. And the first being that there really was a strong desire to have public purpose uses. We didn't hear a lot of recommendations for commercial, things like that. Really was kind of like, hey, can we find something that would benefit the community? There was also a lot of discussion about the importance of having an impressive visual presence and creating a unique sense of place. And obviously that site lends itself to that. The building really creates the bones for that opportunity with investment. But that was very kind of a critical element of this vision. There were also several suggestions that sustainable design should be a part of a restoration project. So how can we use energy more efficiently, water more efficiently? How can we mitigate drainage impacts if we're going to cause drainage? And how can we do things to promote health and well-being? And then finally, there was a lot of discussion about maintaining the history and the culture, respecting the past, especially in the context of this historic building and its relationships to the plantation era. And so some of the uses, and I mentioned them before, that kind of came through that were the ideas of this museum or expansion of the senior center, government office space, community education, performance and creative arts, co-working and makerspace, museum and oral history center. Now, there are also important planning principles, and these are all kind of tied together, and they have different levels of specificity, but planning principles are really critical because, they essentially design or define your character, how you conduct yourself, what you're seeking to accomplish and how you accomplish it. So really in anything that you do, you should have principles. And in this case, the overarching strategy are planning principles for decision making. And so they will inform the selection of preferred uses and will direct planning, design, and development decisions. So one of the key planning principles is engaging the community in decision making. And if you don't do that, oftentimes the community will come out and they will very vocally display their displeasure and can make things extremely difficult. So it's always wise to do that early and do it often. Another important principle for this project is to consult the past but look to the future. So we have a historic building, but internally, maybe it's bones. We can have modern amenities, modern communication technology, maybe take advantage of new sustainability opportunities with architecture and design, things like that. It came out pretty clear that folks want these public and quasi-public uses, and also that we want to mitigate our development impacts. And oftentimes, when folks come in with a project, they're not giving their development impacts sufficient exploration early on. And that comes in and bites you later on. So mitigating development impacts and being aware of them upfront is very important. And then incorporating sustainable design and operational practices, preserving the historic character of the building and grounds, and prioritizing uses that are self-funded. And on that last one, I don't know if Theo or Kimberly would like to chime in on why that's important or if it needs further explanation, but they have a lot of experience with this. Theo, would you like to add anything? I think you're muted.
Yes. Okay, I'm unmuted. So Lahaina Restoration Foundation, we have several, 4 or 5 buildings that we manage in Lahaina, historic buildings that we manage. One example is the old Lahaina Courthouse, which is a county building. And there's just originally when the Art Society first moved in there wasn't like a management plan for the building, but after it got restored in the 1997, then Lahaina Restoration became the manager and we created a management plan. And as a result, the tenants contribute to the cleaning of the common areas, which is extremely important. And then every tenant puts in some money every month for major repairs. So we call it a reserve account for major repairs. But if you have, it's just the maintenance of a building that has public spaces needs to be, there's a cost to it. And you need to make sure that your tenants can do that. So one example of, for this building, you could have well, for example, if you had the art stuff that was talked about, you could have a commercial printing shop, and they could pay the majority of the fees, and then you could have the maintenance fees, and you could have a nonprofit like children's art place, something like that. You could balance it around, but there has to be a regular designated source of income from the building to pay for ongoing maintenance and long-term repairs. So that's just, people tend to forget that. And they want it all community use, and that all sounds great until the toilet pops up and somebody has to call a plumber and pay for it. So that's just a really important thing to keep in mind when we talk about the uses of this beautiful building.
Awesome, that's perfect. Okay, so I'll go on to the next one here. So there are also key drivers, and this project has key drivers, and they will affect the decision making. And this is a little bit different than your planning principles. These are things that exist. They're existing conditions or future conditions or influences, and you don't necessarily have control over them. And they kind of push you around, and essentially they play an important role. And so, for example, a key driver, and we've talked about this, but the relationship is somewhat different in the explanation here, but community preferences, that will drive the decision making. The land use designations drive the decision making. So in this case, for example, the community plan designation is public, quasi-public, and the zoning is R1 residential. So unless you change zoning or change community plan designations, you're going to be kind of stuck with what you can do, with what's permitted. That's a driver. Neighboring land uses, it kind of touches on the community preferences, this offsite parking that we've discussed, and potential funding sources. So, for example, we might have the 10 good ideas that we discussed, and then you run them through some of the drivers and obviously the impact assessment, and evaluation would be much more thorough than this, but you would ask yourself, is it a permitted use? Is it compatible with neighboring land uses? How much parking does it require? And is this parking available? And are there potential funding sources? And so when you kind of go through that filtration process, you might only end up with 3 ideas that are really possible for the project. So we've talked about the neighboring land uses, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want to emphasize that, these are established single family neighborhoods. I think that's a very significant development constraint, something that needs to be carefully considered. And then the second issue, and we've talked about this, is the parking. And right now, it appears that we don't have additional parking on site. Now, there may be opportunities to consult with the existing user of the site and try to articulate times of use, maybe some joint use opportunity, try to create some space on site. But that's really going to depend on what kind of use is proposed and when those uses would take place. So there would be a lot of coordination that need to be required. There are some off-site areas that would lend themselves to off-site parking. There's a parcel right at the corner here, just across the street, that's undeveloped. The problem with that location is it's single-family zoned and single-family community plan. And so it doesn't permit off-site parking. And the process for changing the community plan would be long and very time consuming. Now, the existing Pioneer Mill kind of industrial area down here, parking would be permitted. So this is an area where you could definitely, if ownership's willing to work with you, create a space for parking. The zoning actually permits it right now. So this would be an ideal location. The only problem here is you're going to have to walk probably about 350 feet, and you're going to have to cross the roadway, and there are no sidewalks. So that's a major consideration. And then a little further away, you've got another site that also has a zoning. You don't have to cross the roadway. It's going to be about 500 feet away. And again, there are no sidewalks, so it's not ideal, but it's certainly an opportunity. So I have a couple of slides here that I thought would be kind of interesting to get your feedback on. And this kind of builds a little bit on what we did last time, but with any project that you move forward with, aside from the no action alternative and possibly the renovate exterior option, you're probably going to have to do an environmental assessment. And so in that assessment, you will have to evaluate alternatives. And we've done some of that. We've got that in the community use plan as well. But I'd like to just kind of get your feedback a little bit on some of your thoughts regarding some of these uses. So I'm just going to see if I can type in here. Oops. Let me see if I can stop this show so I can just type a little bit. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you some questions, and it would be wonderful if you could just give me a little bit of input on these uses. Okay. So there are 3, let me just read them really very quickly. So we have the no action alternative, and that is to just keep doing what we're doing without any change at all. Just leave it the way it is. Another alternative would be simply to renovate the exterior of the building. So weatherproof it, swap out the windows, paint it, make it look nice, maybe do the landscaping, and just keep the inside kind of the way it is, clean it out, but just renovate the exterior only. Another discussion topic was, hey, what about county office space? That's clearly a permitted use. Could service a community, make services a little more convenient. There was discussion of health and wellness classes. Now, it's important to note that that probably wouldn't be permitted in the R1 residential district, whereas the other uses would be permitted. Health and wellness classes may also not be permitted in the public, quasi-public district if they're commercial in nature. If they're nonprofit, probably be okay. Same thing is true of the Plantation Museum, probably not permitted in the R1 district, probably permitted in the public, quasi-public district if it's a nonprofit. And the same thing is true of co-working space. Okay, does anybody have any questions as I go through this? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, honestly, I can't even see your faces now. So I was a bit worried that maybe I got kicked off or something. Okay, good. So no action. Okay, I want you folks to think about this no action situation. That's what we have right now. It's just sitting there. Okay, so is this compatible with the neighborhood? Do we have any thoughts or ideas if we just leave it the way it is? Does anybody want to make a few comments about its compatibility with the neighborhood?
Well, I'll make a comment. I mean, that's why we're here today, is because we've gotten so many complaints about the way it looks. So it's not compatible with the neighborhood. It's a abandoned building in the middle of a residential area, so.
Okay, any other thoughts? I mean, it's been this way for a very long time. Is everybody kind of in agreement that it's not compatible with the neighborhood the way it is? Okay, well, I might just add an observation. When we look at uses, we assume that things are actually being used. So, you can, when you talk about like, okay, well, we're going to have like zoning, or we're going to master plan a community, areas and places have purposes. So in the context of a residential district, you have a purpose, it's for residential uses. And so those uses are actually taking place. There's occupancy of buildings, there's people inside using the buildings, and there's maintenance that takes place. And clearly, at least from a planner's perspective, a building that's not being used, that's being, just sitting there empty, is really not compatible with any neighborhood or any use. It's not open space, it's not a park, it's not, it's just derelict. So I would say that's a definite no. And do we think that there are any community benefits? And I think this is kind of self-answering, but if you do an alternatives analysis, you do have to look at community benefits. So does anybody think that there would be a community benefit from the no action alternative? We do. I see somebody with a chat. Got one chat. Any ideas? I hate to answer this for you, but okay, so I'm going to play planner here. So one of the first things we would say when we're evaluating this alternative is we'd say, hey, you know what? It's not going to create traffic. Okay, so no traffic increase. And the same thing would be true for water use, for wastewater, etc. We would also say that, that it's not going to, if you have no action, there'll be no noise increase. In its existing condition, there will be no increase in drainage. Okay, so it's very important when you look at alternatives to actually really get out there ahead of, oh, well, parking. Parking's no parking increase. Okay, so even with the no action, even though it's not compatible with the neighborhood, it's very important to understand how any change could benefit or negatively impact the community. I should have said community benefits and impacts. So that may have, that's kind of confusing, but anyway, so there are benefits because it does not increase traffic, does not increase water or wastewater, no noise, no increase in drainage, no parking increase. And what about key drivers? What would be some of the key drivers that might actually result in a no action being taken? Does anybody have any ideas? No thoughts?
Inertia on the part of the community. If everybody just gives up on it, nothing would happen.
Yeah, this is also important. So it's important to know to kind of consider, well, what might be driving us to the no action alternative. And that just kind of sets us up for when we start thinking about future alternatives and how things are going to work or evolve. But obviously, one of the biggest drivers will just be the cost of rehabilitation. That's huge. And the cost of, the rezoning. Okay, so there are some key drivers, and that's one reason, lack of parking. And that's a reason why the site is like it is right now. Because there are a lot of big drivers out there that are just basically kind of saying, hey, it's going to be an expensive project. It's not going to be easy. It's going to cost money to do this. It's going to be a lack of parking. So it's just it's very important to understand those things when you go into a project like this. Renovating the exterior only. I think everybody would agree, just based on the kind of the discussion of the no action alternative, that's better than the no action because it's more compatible with the neighborhood. Because that results in a use that at least is being maintained, may not be occupied. So buildings being maintained, which is better than the no action. And that might actually kind of jive with one of our principal objectives, which is to have a nice sense of place, uplift the neighborhood, respect the history of the building. So the community benefits, well, that it actually builds on the no action because, we've got the benefit of it improving the neighborhood. And surprisingly, there are some community benefits because you have no traffic, you have no water, no wastewater, no noise, no drainage, no parking increase. So it's no impact plus looks better, basically.
So can I add something?
Yeah.
So I would add that it's no impact looks better, but also a maintained building that is secure won't have the break-ins and the graffiti that have happened in the last month. So obviously, I would consider them unsavory individuals are coming into the neighborhood or moving through the neighborhood and actually see a sitting duck. And so if it's maintained and people are present, taking care of it, it may stop that kind of action.
That's a huge point. That's a very, very, very good point. And actually, you know, one of the, with this table, probably on the no action, I mean, I should have probably said we'd add community benefits and negative impacts, just to balance this out. But because obviously we talked about, well, and the compatibility with the neighborhood, we hit about that. There's many complaints now, and we know what those issues are. But okay, and so some of the key drivers on this, what would be like a key driver that might lead us to just renovating only the exterior?
It could be an incentive. Somebody would see it and see, wow, I'm willing to invest $5 million to make this a real building.
Well, okay, so
Potential of it.
well, that would be a community and or neighborhood preference. A strong preference. I mean, I think some other key drivers would be, obviously, would be less expensive, wouldn't it? The cost of just doing the exterior is a lot less than the cost of doing the interior. So it would be less expensive. And I should bring this up too. I mean, I'm sorry I'm playing planner on you, but those issues with the neighborhood, you know, the single family, if the community becomes very concerned about more traffic or more parking impacts, then they may make any other kind of use difficult. And so the only fallback use is just renovating the exterior. So that's why it's very important to consider, you know, the neighborhood environment. So it would be a community opposition to more use. Okay. Anyway, so just important to kind of frame those out when you're looking at alternatives, makes you smarter when you're going through the process. Now, the one good, there are some real benefits to the no action and renovate exterior only, and that is that they're permitted. They're actually permitted. You could do it right now. You wouldn't have to worry about it. County office space too is permitted. I mean, if they, you know, they permitted the West Maui Senior Center, so county office space would be a permitted use. Now, are there any thoughts about whether having, say, let's just call it a, you know, an area, say, for the planning department to have a few staff, and maybe they could provide some services. And I'm just saying planning department because I'm familiar with the planning department. So it keeps those folks closer to the community, but would that be compatible with the neighborhood? Does anybody have any thought about that?
The only thing I can think of is the senior center is being called upon to host certain county things that is infringing on its main goal. So it's not the neighborhood, it's the immediate neighbor. But I don't know what the county office would do for the average single family homeowner in a I don't know, but certainly it would help. It could alleviate some of the stress on the senior center.
Okay, and I mean, I think we have to be very considerate of the single family residences, but also it is public, quasi-public, you know, the community plan designation, which is a new designation. So in that context, you also need to consider the broader community. So county office space, does this sound like something that would help Lahaina, having a little bit of county office space over there? Well, this is compatibility with the neighborhood, but any other thoughts about that? We got a raised hand here. Are we able to answer that?
All right, Louisa?
Hello, I just unmuted, thank you. Well, yeah, from the get-go with the meetings, it did seem as though we were maybe going down this road that it was perhaps more likely to use the facility, at least for, in part, county office space. And so planning department, there's so many other departments, also council representation. We all do on the west side drive to the other side. And yet it with traffic, it would reduce the amount of time and energy for a lot of people. It might actually encourage people to maybe do the right things and get the permits and, for whatever buildings, residential, business. So right, compliance, there we go, much better, yeah. I just think there's so many potential possibilities. And yet you notice I said part because there's always been that desire for some sort of shared use, kind of going back to maybe nonprofits, which you had mentioned earlier, but I'll sign off for now because other people might have more to add.
Any other ideas? And that was a great comment, by the way. Really fantastic. Okay. I might just throw a few thoughts out there. Having county office space in that building, it also addresses the issue of the building being empty and the building being derelict. So one would assume that if the county is occupying that space, it's actually going to be a building that's alive, it's being used, it looks good, it's maintained, and it addresses all the impacts that we were talking about before. But having said that, and we've talked about this several times, we're always cognizant that we have a residential neighborhood next door, so you want to limit your traffic intrusion into that neighborhood. You want to be concerned about noise impacts and things like that. So the uses should be uses that are not going to take on-site parking, on-street parking. We're not going to be driving through those residential streets, creating a lot of noise. Those are all important things. I'm going to skip the community benefits. I think we kind of talked about that in the context of the, but some of the key drivers on this thing, can somebody give me one really significant key driver that might lend itself to this alternative? We have a hand raised here.
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, the county can pay its bills, I think, is a key driver if we use it for county space.
Right. County can pay its bills. I mean, that's huge. I mean, they will definitely pay their bills. I mean, that's a really strong key driver. Do we have any others?
I would say we were talking about sustainability for the building, but if we get rid of the driving to Wailuku from West Maui to do permitting, it's sustainability for the island.
Yeah, and that's a really good comment, because I think everybody is really trying to create more sustainability in our communities. It's a very clear policy in all of our planning policy documents. And so that, might drive decision making. How is this going to reduce traffic, reduce carbon emissions? So we could say community desire for sustainability. Okay. I'm going to throw out a really low hanging fruit one, and that is the fact that it's actually a permitted use. So I think we should, that's a very good example of a driver. It's a permitted use already.
Yeah, plus they own it, plus they own the building. So hello, they should
Yeah.
occupy it.
County owns building and property. I mean. Okay, well, that's really good. Let's move on to the next one. We could spend a lot of time on these. We don't have that much time. I just need to, okay, so health and wellness classes. Now, I do want to reiterate that that is not permitted in the R1 district. None of these are going to be permitted in the residential district. Unless they're nonprofit and we change the zoning to public, quasi-public. Okay, but these are all uses that people thought would be a good idea. If we do change the zoning and the zoning becomes public, quasi-public, and these are nonprofit uses, then we can do these things. So just bear that in mind. But how about health and wellness classes? You guys think that's something that's actually compatible with the neighborhood?
It seems like it would create a lot of parking, a need for a lot of parking, any kind of class situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the parking demand for something like this is going to be significantly more, and the requirement will be more. And that's one reason why I put it in there. I just wanted to see if you guys would pick that up. You know, if you have more parking, it means you have, you know, if you have more parking, you may have more cars too, you know, coming to and from the site. So that's an important issue. What about community benefits? I mean, I think obviously there would be some community benefits, but.
So back to compatibility with neighborhood, I think this is the first one that really offers a chance for the neighborhood to actually use this building. So they may or may not have a permit, but they may actually go to classes in this building and walk over instead of drive.
Yeah, you know what, that's a really good comment. And one could argue from a sustainability perspective, and we do this all the time in our planning, you know, that having mixed use neighborhoods with these kinds of activities close to where people live, you know, reduces energy use. It creates health and well-being by promoting people going out and walking to these places instead of driving. So I think there is a sustainability aspect to this. So we have a raised hand for Anne Maria.
Anne Marie?
Oh, yes. The only thing I would comment on that, and I'm not sure which of your three categories that this would fall under, but are you duplicating what's going on at the senior center in some way as well? Because I know they have health and wellness classes there at the senior center. Or in some way, would that be an expansion of it? I don't know. I'm not sure, but I just want people to be aware that there's already some health and wellness going on the same lot.
You know, that's a really, really good pickup. One of the really great ideas about that, I mean, it offers a couple of things. One, if that's already ongoing, then some folks in the community might say, I mean, I don't know if it's impacting them because I don't live in the neighborhood, but people might say, oh, we're used to that. You know, we're already seeing people go and they have these classes. Maybe some of these people are using those classes. So on the one hand, that can be a positive. On the other hand, obviously, you wouldn't want it to, you wouldn't want to duplicate what's already being done. But that, yeah, that was a very good point. Okay, do we have any other comments? We got another chat here. I don't know if that's somebody raising their hand or.
Yeah, I can't see it.
Okay, so how about key drivers? Are there any drivers that would kind of point us in this direction or away from this use?
Definitely the parking would be a way.
I mean, I hate to bring this up again, but you know, the zoning and community plan change. Now, I think, you know, we've been talking about this and we're actually suggesting that the zoning and community plan get changed. So yeah, short term maybe, but the other issue is like, are these generally nonprofit uses or are they commercial for-profit uses? And, you know, if it's a for-profit yoga center, for example, then maybe it wouldn't be permitted in the public, quasi-public district. So that's just something to be thinking about too. All right, so this is all getting a little repetitive, but do we have any comments on the Plantation Museum? Again, not permitted unless it's nonprofit and we change the zoning to public quasi-public. I mean, I guess you could argue that if the county builds its own museum, the County of Maui Plantation Museum, then it might be permitted in the R1 district. But. Okay, we have a raised hand here.
Louisa?
Yeah, there we go. I'm so glad you just brought that up about the county, because I was thinking, well, let's say if it was, I mean, it is the county's building. If it is run by the county, can you get a mixed use in there with a nonprofit? I hadn't thought about the county running a museum. They could endorse it, but I mean, how would that work? Would it be a case where you could have a nonprofit running a museum? I mean, would that not be allowed? or would it be? It would be mixing the use of, county use, unless you said they were running the museum. But I'm just wondering, I'm not sure if I'm being clear, can you actually have a nonprofit in the mix?
Yeah, and that is a really, really, really excellent question. And that is a question that's actually, going to have to get addressed with the planning department and further kind of due diligence of, different uses. Because what they're going to want to know is they're going to want to know all the details to be able to answer that question, and they won't answer it unless, you have all the details for every specific type of use you're proposing. So right now, I'm not sure, but my guess would be that if it's a nonprofit and, it is a government building, I think there's a strong argument that it might be permitted, but, we tried to raise that question and we were not successful in getting an answer in the short term. So I think that needs more exploration, put it that way. And if it does, if you find out that, if it's a nonprofit using the county's government building, that would be permitted, that might change things. But yeah, I wouldn't want to venture to say that it would be permitted at this point. Yeah. And the same thing is true with co-working space, all these kinds of uses where you have a nonprofit. And if you go in and you look, see, the problem is if you look at the residential district, there's a very narrow description of what you can do that's a government type of activity. And it's in a residential district. So, you know, the planning department's going to be very concerned about how that impacts neighboring properties and also the precedents that that would have throughout the county, where you might have single family zoning and the idea that, you know, a nonprofit wants to go in and use a property. So they're going to be very cautious about how they respond to that. And then the the public quasi-public district is set up for this kind of a situation where you have a nonprofit wanting to use a space, even if it's government owned. So the better designation would be public quasi-public, which is consistent with the community plan. So I really wouldn't be surprised if the county were to take a conservative approach on it and say that now you got to change your zone. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Anyway, what about co-working space or maker space? Any comments about that?
I think this is the other use that could actually directly benefit the neighborhood, that someone in the neighborhood could be like, yep, this building again is for me now.
Yeah, I think that's a very good comment. And the one thing that makes me nervous about this is, you know, would it typically be a commercial operator that would create this kind of space?
Yeah, actually all three of these go to that
Yeah.
last driver. I think it was a driver of who's paying for this? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, what's gonna pay the bills once restoration is done? All three of these lack that.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like I said, you know, when you start filtering these through, you know, the key drivers and some of the other, you know, planning principles and things like that, then your selection really narrows down for what will end up being viable on that property. But anyway, you know, so I wanted to just go through this exercise so that you understand kind of the kind of analysis that will be taking place as uses are analyzed. And it will give you some kind of a perspective on what will likely take place on the property because of the community benefit considerations and the key drivers, compatibility with neighborhood. So just kind of a rough exercise here. I hope you found that helpful. Okay, so let's look at this milestone schedule. And so at the end of the community use plan, we have a schedule. It's conceptual, but it's a series of steps that should get us from where we are today to potentially having uses in that building. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, because as you can see, the conceptual milestone schedule has a year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is just kind of our best guess for how long things might take. But, you know, where we are right now, we don't, you know, we're not proposing necessarily a specific use. And we do not have a group that is banging on the door to come in and use the property. And we don't have any funding. So, you know, that makes this plan a little bit different in the sense that it's more conceptual than definitive in its proposal. So where do we go from here? So you'll have a community use plan, and one of the most important next steps will be to try to facilitate community awareness and support for the plan. So that means, folks are going to have to meet with the council members. They'll have to meet with the administration. They'll have to meet with potential user groups, the community, potentially more meetings with the community, but they'll, want to advertise the community use plan and generate interest. And that will help develop funding for the project, hopefully some county funding. So when people understand the benefits that can be derived from the reuse of the building and the negative impacts that are currently taking place, and they understand that a plan has been prepared and that there are defined steps to get this stuff done, well, then they might be willing to actually fund it. Now, there are a couple of important considerations, and one is hazardous materials testing. It has been suggested that there are potential hazardous materials in the building, so those have been identified and would have to be addressed. And I would suggest that something like that occur sooner rather than later. And the other thing is we do have a question here. And my suggestion for the question for the raised hand is that maybe after we get through the slide, because we'll have a lot of time for questions after the slide. So I'm just going to continue, but hold your thought. So the detailed building rehabilitation evaluation and cost estimates for occupancy. We did do an evaluation as part of this process. We had an architectural firm with a lot of expertise in historic preservation and rehabilitation survey the building. They identified areas where we would need to make improvements. And they also gave us the confidence that this building is reusable. If they come back and said, hey, this is kind of a non-starter, it's beyond repair, well, then we might have a very different set of recommendations. But they certainly think that this is a building that has potential. However, their scope wasn't such that they could actually go in and really do a detailed building rehabilitation evaluation with good, solid cost estimates. And I think that's important because then you can actually give something to the decision makers and they could really understand what it's all going to cost. And that's just being responsible. So that is recommended as step 4. Also, if you're going to rehabilitate this building and you have some ideas for uses, then there will need to be a HRS 343 environmental assessment for any hazardous materials and weatherproofing repairs. So if it's determined that weatherproofing and hazardous materials abatement should be a first phase, you'll definitely want to go through, well, you'll have to go through the 343 process. And you might just want to do the entire, just move forward with the master plan improvements and capture it all in the 343 to save long-term costs and not have to do it again, not to segment the 343 document. But performing weatherproofing repairs, that would be a really nice first step if cost is an issue. That would make the building look a lot better, and it would also protect the building. We do suggest going through a change in zoning to public quasi-public. The community plan designation is public quasi-public. The zoning is R1 residential. It opens up just a lot of different opportunities if you have a public quasi-public designation. So it would be nice to be able to piggyback that with the 343 environmental assessment to save time and money. Solicit potential lessees. So, once you actually have an understanding of the cost for all this and you're in the process of changing zoning and people can see that this is real. Maybe the weatherproofing has been done, the building looks good from the outside. Well, then you might start getting a lot of people that are interested in using the building. So this should be something that's ongoing, but we have an area of time that will be reserved for that. And then, of course, soliciting funding for the renovations and the upgrades, which could be very costly. So that would be a conceptual schedule. It's draft at this point. Planning department's reviewing the draft report, and they will have recommendations, so there may be some tweaking or some changes to this. And with that, why don't we open it up for questions? I know this was a long presentation, so.
Martin?
Do we
Yes.
have any questions?
I was thinking, I've done renovations like this in the private sector. What we would do is go out and see if there was some interest from a potential user. For instance, if it's the county that wants to use it as office space, or if it's, if that's the consensus in the neighborhood, but if the county wants to use it as office space, it seems to me that that would sharpen the focus of the entire schedule, rather than start in year 4 to seek a potential leasee, that you'd move it up into the second spot and explore potential uses. If the county wants to use it as office space, I think it's probably better to know it today than in 4 years when you might get community hopes up for some other use. If it's the senior center wants to expand and move their administrative offices into this building, it just sharpens the focus, because then you could begin to propose a funding proposal, not just for county funds, but for state and federal funds to match that particular user. And maybe you'd get bonus points for, for what the senior center wanted to propose or what the county wanted to perform in that building. But from a private sector standpoint, we would move 8 up into 2 and then expand the funding horizon, just not county, depending on who would like to use the building, but look at other grant funding. Could be nonprofit funding. It could be, like I said, federal or state. But you, as an investment standpoint, you would not want to put that so far back in the schedule, because I do think you're going to get community a little misunderstanding, some confusion on what it really is going to be in that building. So I would sharpen the focus and kind of put it to the county. You are the owner of this building. Do you want to expand offices here? If you do, let's start to cobble funding together and move forward with community support. But to move number 8, or to have the potential leases so far down in the schedule, I think you're going to waste a lot of time and probably miss a lot of opportunities for grant funding.
Well, I think that was a really good pickup, and I appreciate that. Yeah, so I agree with that. I mean, I think it probably should be moved up to number 2. It should at least be kind of occurring concurrently with number 2. And so, yeah, I strongly agree with that. I'm glad you pointed that out. It's a good comment. Yeah, and I would also say, though, that, some of these things, like, for example, doing the building rehabilitation evaluation with cost estimates. We actually got a proposal for that. So we understand about how much that's going to cost. And it's not a small amount of money. I mean, it's a decent amount of money. But there are some things, like just having some good due diligence information up front would be very helpful. And I think it would make the process of actually getting people interested in leasing the building, just having some basic answers like, well, what needs to be done with the building? How much is that going to cost? Those kinds of things. So I agree. I think that we should definitely move number 8 up to number 2. And, that should really probably be going on concurrently with this develop community awareness and support. That would likely be something that occurs potentially throughout the entire process if we don't have an early catch on a particular user. Any other comments? I thought that was a very helpful comment. Theo, did you want to speak to that as well, or Kimberly? Or anybody else?
No, yeah, I would agree with that. That's, to me, it goes along with it, develop community awareness and support. And at the same time you're doing that, and by the way, anybody that's interested, I give tours. Bring your flashlight and your heart out. I can give you a tour of the building. So, yeah, I think that's all part of it.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great catch. I really appreciate that.
Also, I think the county and the senior center are the two that have kind of been named. Like we have these amorphous ideas of a wellness center, but we don't really have a thing. So if the county and the senior center are hard nosed, we'll know that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. Yeah. Okay, do we have any other questions? Surely there must be one more.
So I have one. So what is the next step? So you have this plan out, but you've got this plan created, it's finalized. What happens then?
Okay, so the next step is to go back and update the draft plan that's already been prepared with these comments. And once the draft has been updated with these comments and an initial round of commenting that may be going on right now at the planning department, we will wait and get any comments that the client has. In this case, the county of Maui funded the project, so they may have some comments that they'd like to share, and the community use plan will be updated. And then it will be delivered to the planning department. And then hopefully the steps identified in this milestone schedule as revised will take place, and I mean, ideally it would be, great to meet with the council members and present this plan to them, especially the West Maui council member, inform the mayor of the plan and other interested stakeholders and just go through the process of developing that community awareness and support so that it becomes something that's important to the community. It's on their radar. And that'll make it easier for finding people that might want to lease the building and for getting the funding. And I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that. Theo, do you want to? I know Stanley, you're on this call. I don't know if you want to, or anybody that might be from the planning department.
Annalise is on the call too. She could call.
Annalise, are you there? Stanley? Okay, maybe they've left. So, okay, do we have any other comments here? Not, I'm going to stop my share. And I can see you all again. That was actually rather bizarre. For some reason, I couldn't see any of you folks when I was giving this presentation. It was very, very weird. There's like a period of the presentation where I literally
Annalise couldn't unmute, so I'm trying to get her to unmute.
I was waiting for a phone call, so someone
Hi,
did.
sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. But I think, the ideas that you've outlined about how to sort of move forward, I think that that's a good plan. And I think that, speaking with the council member, speaking with the mayor, just getting the idea out there and getting the information out there, because I think a lot of people don't know about this building.
Well, Annalise, and I, would like to say that, this building is actually really negatively impacting the neighborhood. It's abandoned, the windows are broken, the weeds are growing out of control. It's really unfortunate. And the sad thing is, when you think about it, I mean, I shouldn't be criticizing the county, but it is a county-owned space and county property. So it's something's really got to happen. I mean, just kind of saying that, this is a, I mean, even at the most minimum, which is to update the exterior and try to get the maintenance of the landscaping done, would be a huge community service. So I'm sure in the no alternative analysis that would be done in an environmental assessment, that would be very strongly articulated.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. It's horrible that the building has gotten into this state, and I hope that more can be done to take care of it, because it is an important resource.
Yeah. Stanley, did you have any ideas? I know you're sitting over there muted, but Stanley did a lot of the original work, and there's probably not a guy out there that doesn't understand this property and its history better than Mr. Solomilla. So.
I haven't been in the building for at least a decade, but yeah, I was involved in originally documenting the building and preparing a nomination for the Register of Historic Places. It's really an important building, and unfortunately, and I'm saying this as a descendant of workers who lived at Ukoli'i. And worked, in the case of my grandfather, for their entire life for Pioneer Mill. There's a desire to forget about it and say, we can move on. But I think all our family histories, we're tied to a business like a sugar plantation, because it affects our lives so thoroughly, and it has for generations. And I think what I, envision for this place is, if we can't do a museum, you can do it in signage or in other things that will tell the history. And I just think it's important, to keep the history in focus. And yes, our Native Hawaiian population suffered immensely. Our working population suffered immensely as well. And at some point, maybe we'll be able to talk about, this shared trauma that everybody doesn't want to talk about. That I think is the purpose in doing any kind of museography or educational program that involves this kind of a history in a place called Lahaina.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stanley. And, even if you, for example, like, let's assume that you got a county user in there for some, maybe it's an office space at county folks can use or whatever. I mean, a council member's office or some kind of a space like that. I mean, you could certainly have a space in the building and have that history and display it, like you said, so that it becomes a story, you know, if it's not a standalone use. That's a great comment.
And I'll add one more thing. It's, I believe, the last Hackfield building left standing in Hawaii.
Wow.
This was built by the German firm of H. Hackfeld and Company out of Bremen.
About
Yeah.
the Fleetwood's building, that's the other one,
I don't know about that one.
Mhm.
on Front Street, the old.
Yep.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
The store. Sorry about that. But Lahaina's got it because everywhere else, the Hackfield buildings are gone.
So we have two.
There you go.
We have a hand raised here.
Yep, Louisa?
Yeah, let's see, couple of thoughts, and just kind of going back to the county. And in the next step plan, you know, it was identified, you update the draft, you take it, I think, also to the planning department, and, you know, then you bring it back to the community and then back to the planning department. At some point, like early on, I would think that when you're also talking about asking the county, which I think is, you know, well said, well taken, bring the county mayor, whoever, you know, get a busload, come out to the building, because it is just, it's such an embarrassment of such a beautiful historic building. The fact that, yeah, it is one of two that is a pretty strong structure, I think, in terms of the integrity. I mean, you'd hate to see, I mean, I realize if it's just made pretty on the outside, that's one thing, but my hope is that it can be used for more. It has a life and could, so too many thoughts there, but, you know, bring the mayor, people out, because, I mean, even Stanley, you said you haven't been in the building for 10 years. And it will bring anyone who's been involved through their families, mixed feelings, but still, I think if you get those people who are, you know, in the roles that they are in the county on site, maybe they'll also realize just what a, as you were saying, a negative impact it currently has, and it could be so much better. Trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, the signage, yeah, the reference to that. Yeah, I mean, if it's county offices, whatever, usually you have community or conference rooms. And in a conference room, yeah, you could have perhaps something that helps to tell the story. The videos, the photos. Anyway, more, I'll be quiet.
Very good comments. Penny?
I'm looking, okay, I'm unmuted. You may have answered this earlier, but I don't recall. What is driving the need for an environmental assessment?
Well, it's county property, and most likely it will be county funding. Those are two triggers right there that would require an environmental assessment. Yeah, now there are some things that you can do that might, you know, that might be exempted from having to get an EA. But, you know, for the kinds of things that we're talking about, with the exception of maybe just painting it, like doing, you know, maintaining it, you'd have to do an environmental assessment.
Okay, thank you.
And let me just, if you don't mind me just speaking to that a little bit more, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the EA process.
I have.
Rigorous. Okay, yeah, you know, it's rigorous. I mean, you know, it requires the alternatives analysis, development impacts, and public notifications. It could be a public hearing with the Maui Planning Commission. Could go to Urban Design Review Board, depending upon if there's a planning department interest in that. Cultural Resources Commission. Oh, do we have somebody? Oh, okay. Another thing, Auntie Roselle has been. Can you read that, Kimberly? There's a comment.
Yep, this is from Okolu. Auntie Roselle Bailey has been advocating for a sugar museum for years now. Seems like this may work, and also a place to do research on plantations, maps, and archives that the Pioneer Mill once had. I believe lots of the information was sent to Hamilton Library at UH Manoa, but there's still a lot of information to Halepai, and Maui Land and Pine still has documentation. I'm sure this can be available to the public. LRF has the capacity to take care of these older documents, maps, and to catalog them. Another thing Auntie Roselle has been advocating for is a war memorial that used to be at the banyan tree. Perhaps at least a catalog of those names to be housed or represented respectfully could occur here. This may be the place for it. This will anchor the community.
That's, one of the kind of thoughts that kind of came to my mind anyway. And I don't know if I should say this, but there was some discussion at the last meeting about how, some of these uses might tie into the senior center. And, one might say that, okay, let's just add like this kind of an oral history museum, an area for print documents, all that kind of good stuff. A lot of seniors are very, very into the history of place. Many of them have time, and are interested in participating in activities. So, that could be something that really, maybe it's not open 24 hours a day. Maybe it's open, just during certain times. And maybe it's an activity that gets wrapped into the senior center. So you have a building that looks nice, it's been taken care of, it's cleaned out, and it's operating, and it's serving a really nice public purpose. Anyway, just a thought.
So just FYI, we just reopened the plantation. We have a plantation museum that was for 10 years. It was at the Wharf Cinema Center. We just moved it to the Pioneer Mill, Lahaina Cannery Mall, which we got a free space with, and they open and close it every day. So there's some real advantages there cost-wise. And that we have both the sugar and the pineapple plantation era things. And a lot of people have really enjoyed it so far. So the grand opening is on the 28th, I believe it is. What day is that?
19th. March 19th, 2 o'clock, Saturday.
But it's open every day now, 10 to 6 in the Lahaina Cannery.
Yeah, I would actually, if we were to go that route, I would advocate either the vignettes within another purpose, like the county offices, or the research, because a museum, I think we got a lot of this should be for the community, not for tourists. And the minute you throw a museum on it, you got tourists driving up Lahaina Luna Wood Schools in. But a research center is going to be lower numbers, lower cars, and really more pertinent to locals or descendants of locals.
Yeah, Kimberly, that was a very, very good comment. Glad you pointed that out. This is not really an area where you want to draw a lot of traffic, and tourists all over the place, and you have pedestrian issues, Okay, do we have any other comments or thoughts? Any more suggestions regarding next steps? Okay, well, just to say one last thing, and then I'll turn it over to Theo.
Actually, we've got a hand raised for Kalapana and Anu.
Oh,
They went away, but I'm gonna unmute them anyway. Did you guys have something?
wow.
On the topic of the resource center, I'm so glad you brought that up, Kimberly, because during the previous 2 meetings, that was the idea that I thought was the most invigorating and worthwhile for posterity. And I know that it's one of those more amorphous ideas that may not fall into the current permitting uses and could have traffic implications. But I think it was an idea that was proposed by one of the Lahaina Luna kumu, the teachers there. And I thought that was really cool because even though they may not be a resident of that space, they're certainly a part of that community. So for them to think of that as being an appropriate use, I thought was a really cool thing, to create a resource center and especially to engage youth in studying history in a holistic way, like how Stanley was mentioning, not only on the sugar era, but a broad perspective of history. The resource center would be really cool. And I was really grateful to get to see the hard work done at the new Sugar Museum at the Lahaina Cannery Mall. And it's awesome. It's so, so cool. But to have a place for people to dive deeper would be really neat. Thanks for letting me ramble.
Yeah, I think I do have that, by the way, in the plan. I just pulled out some of the concepts for the PowerPoint. So. Any other comments or? Okay, I guess, Theo, do you want to close us out or?
Well, sure. It's been a long process for those of you who've been with us since the beginning, almost a year now. But anyway, we did come up with a really comprehensive plan, and Mike, I think you did an absolutely great job. This process I never could do it by myself. So I think we really needed you to guide us through this process, and I appreciate everybody contributing their ideas. And anybody that wants to charge forward with the community awareness and stuff like that, let me know, and we'll see if we can get some energy going toward it, because yeah, it is an eyesore. Why should we accept it as it is? Why should we accept this? It's a county property, which means it belongs to all of us. So we need to take charge, and we need to say we want it better. We just, as a community, we're not doing this anymore. We need to make a change. So email me, call me, and let's do it.
Great, awesome. Okay, I guess we're going to shut it down. No more comments? All right. Theo, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Working with you too, and we'll be communicating soon. And also big kudos to Stanley, because he provided a lot of good history. You might remember that he participated in the PowerPoint. I think it was March, yeah, the prior PowerPoints. That good history overview. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, aloha.